Welcome to the Executing a Dining Facility Account Review training module. This module is unclassified. It is based on DAPAM 30-22, TBMed 530, the Tri-Service Food Code, and AR 30-22. The purpose of this module is to train battalion-level logisticians on the proper execution of dining facility account reviews. This training is based on the Illinois Army National Guard Dfar checklist and process, so it does contain some state-specific information. However, the majority of the material is based on the Army standard and is therefore generally applicable to any Army National Guard unit. The Dining Facility Account Review, also known as a Dfar, is an annual requirement. Every Guard unit must be reviewed annually by its higher headquarters, and that means every unit must be reviewed, including those units that do not cook for themselves. A Dfar must be conducted for each unit's IDT and AT records. These reviews can be done separately or simultaneously, but just like there are separate files for annual training and IDT, you should also use a separate checklist to conduct these Dfars. Dfar Reviewer Qualifications. The Dfar should be conducted by a 92 Golf cook or 922 Alpha food service warrant or an enlisted supervisor from the next higher headquarters. They should be familiar with the state food service SOP, with all applicable food service regulations, such as AR 30-22, DAPAM 3022, and TBMed 530. They should be familiar with the Dfar checklist, with the unit's previous Dfar and any food service reoccurring issues. They should also have experience participating in a previous Dfar, and this person should also have the Food Safety and Protection certification. Dfar Administration. Dfars are always conducted by their higher headquarters. So state reviews brigade files, brigade reviews battalion, and battalion reviews company. And by regulation, the Dfar must be completed within 6 months of the end of the fiscal year. Battalions should target first quarter, which would be October through December, and brigades should target second quarter, which is January through March. This is not always going to be the case, but it's a good rule of thumb. Auditor expectations. Reviewers should absolutely hold units to the standard. And the standard is defined in Army regulations and the state food service SOP. But just because they're keeping units to the standard doesn't mean that they should not fix situations that can be fixed on the spot. Reviewers should use the Dfar as an opportunity to train soldiers and improve those units. They should make sure they dedicate sufficient time to on-the-spot corrections and mentoring. Unit expectations. Units should prepare for Dfars primarily through reviewing the checklist and making sure each of those items are accounted for. But there are a few things they can do in addition that will just make the Dfar more effective and more efficient. First, they should allow adequate time to conduct the Dfar. This could be anywhere from 4 to 8 hours, depending on the level of complexity of the dining facility operation. They should also require the food operations sergeant and the supply sergeant to participate in the Dfar. Very often when an auditor has questions, if that supply sergeant or food ops sergeant is not available, that question may not get answered and therefore could get charged against the unit. Units should also provide access to all of their food service records, and they should provide access to at least the past 6 months of 1379s. Additionally, they should make sure garrison and field equipment is displayed properly and ready for inspection. Auditor preparations. The auditor has a few things that they need to do to prepare for a successful Dfar as well. First, they should review the unit's previous Dfar. They want to basically know what are the previous problems this unit has encountered, or to identify if there are any trends that require further inquiry. They should also familiarize themselves with the Dfar checklist and the state SOP. It's also a good idea to bring an assistant and a calculator. The assistant is nice because two heads are generally better than one, and it's good to have somebody to bounce things off of. The auditor should also bring a printed copy of the Dfar checklist, and this is where he or she will make notes, and ultimately it will be used to brief the commander or the senior logistician after the review. When the standard is not met. So this is one of those sections that I referred to at the beginning of the module that is state specific. So you can skip this if it doesn't apply to you. Two or more major failures, or if 50% of total failures in a given section occur, that will result in a failure for that section. When there are two or more section failures, that will result in an overall Dfar failure. And when an overall Dfar failure occurs, that will result in a re-review, which means that the reviewer will need to go back to that unit after sufficient time has passed to review their records for a second time. Dfar re-reviews should be planned to occur within 90 days of the original review. 3 months is plenty of time for a unit to square away most food service issues. The unit will execute an action plan based on the result of the original Dfar, and that should guide them to make the corrections that are required for the re-review. Dfar completion. When a Dfar is complete, the reviewer needs to follow a few steps. First, compile and verify your notes. This is where you can use your assistant. Make sure you agree on everything. Next, update your checklist and indicate the overall rating. Did they pass? Did they fail? And then you want to suggest action items for the unit and help them identify their next steps. Finally, you want to brief the commander or the ranking logistician. You should leave a copy of the Dfar with the commander, and then maintain a copy of the Dfar at the unit's higher headquarters. So if you're a battalion and you're reviewing a company, you need to keep a copy of the Dfar at battalion. When a brigade reviews a battalion's files, they will make the Dfar available to the state team. This is the part of the module where I will begin walking through the individual checklist items. Starting out with Section A, Publications and Files. This is basically going to be a series of questions where the answer is yes, no, or non-applicable. The first question, does the unit have a current copy of State Food Service SOP, LOI, and MOU? That's pretty self-explanatory. They either have it or they don't. And if they don't have it, this is an example of an item you can correct on the spot. Next, do they have a current copy of the State Food Service Management Board meeting minutes and the state approved menu? Same thing. If they don't have it, correct on the spot. The third item is regarding various regulations that are required to have on hand. The Illinois SOP does not require a physical copy of these regulations. However, it's a good idea to have printed copies of the TB Med 530, the state SOP, and DAPAM 3022 at a minimum in the kitchen to enable the cooks to provide training. Next, are the records being maintained in accordance with ARIMS, or the Army Records Information Management System? That's a pretty easy one. They either have the labels or they don't. And the next question really goes into a little bit more detail. Do they have some specific minimum requirements for ARIMS? Section A, Publications and Files, continued. The first couple of questions are regarding the Dfar itself. The first question is whether the unit has copies of their previous Dfars on file, and the second one is more geared to senior commands that conduct Dfars, and the question is, do they have copies of their subordinate command Dfars on file? Third question is about annual training files. Are they maintained separately physically from the IDT files? This is a requirement by Army regulations. You have to have both annual training and IDT records, but they have to be physically separated. That means that could be simply in a different file folder. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to be in different filing cabinets, just that they are handled, they're managed, and physically separate. Next question is, does the unit have a letter of authorization to purchase rations from a local vendor? This is a state of Illinois requirement. Next, does the unit have DA 1687s on file? This document is used to authorize AFMIS users. And finally, does the unit have duty appointment orders for food service officer, field sanitation team, and AFMIS?
This slide, Food Service Rations Request, has just two questions on it. Is the unit commander requesting for SIK? SIK are your enlisted soldiers and that are coded P, no officers, no AGR. And is there evidence of cash reimbursement? Cash reimbursement is picking up their meal and paying for their meal later.
So what we're doing down in the table is we're going to take an average of 3 months along with the meal, pick one meal. Then you're going to take the sick that was explained above with the requested amount. Then down below you will subtract the servings issued, and that will equal the difference. In order to get the variance percentage, you will take that difference divided by the requested, and then with the amount that's in your calculator, you will times that by 100 in order to get the percentage. The next column is the target over and under. The target is the requested and actuals that are within a 10% variance, either plus or minus. The under indicates the unit requested less than the actual needed. Troops may not be receiving adequate portions, and this will create troop morale problems if unit consistently orders too few rations. I know that I would be pretty pissed off if I got a small portion of bacon. Over unit rations requests are higher than actual needed. This may be result of ordering beyond sick or miscalculating non-sick participations. Commanders are responsible to ensure government resources are not wasted or abused.
Section C, Food Service Records. The first few questions refer to the AFMIS request. This is where you are requesting food for a meal. First question is, do you have the requests on file? Is there a copy of your AFMIS request on file, and does this include rosters for consolidating units? So if a unit is feeding other units, they're supporting them, then you should have that information as well. Do you have that supported unit information? The next question regarding AFMIS request is, did the unit submit requests to the subsistence clerk not less than 60 days before the scheduled IDT period? Pretty self-explanatory. This is a common problem with units. The next two questions are regarding prime vendor meals. The next two questions are Illinois Army National Guard specific, as they refer to something known as the POLI. First question, did the unit submit an adjusted POLI to USPFO and the subsistence clerk not less than 5 days after receipt of the initial POLI? So the way this works is when you make a request for prime vendor support, the state will send a POLI back to you that has all of the food items listed on it. It's your responsibility as a unit to update that POLI, to mark through anything that you currently have in stock that you don't need to order, to adjust quantities, etc. And then you would send that back to the state, and that needs to be done within 5 business days. The next question refers to the vendor invoice. Does the unit have the vendor receipt documentation on file for each meal? Anytime you're working with a vendor, you need to have this information on file. The last two questions are regarding the DA 3034, also known as the production schedule or cook's worksheet. And this is used to determine portions to prepare, which cook is assigned to which food item. And so cooks will do these for each meal, but you need to put a copy in your files. As an auditor, you can look at these to determine if the portions to prepare correspond with the actual amounts purchased to prepare that meal. So this is just one more piece of information that helps you understand the status of this food operation. DA 5914, also known as the ration control sheet. The question is, has the ration control sheet been prepared properly, and is there a separate sheet for each type of ration and meal? So this is a common error that is made where these are not completed. So this is definitely one of those things to look for. Next, DA 3234, also known as the inventory control sheet. Is there a separate inventory control sheet on file for each month? And does the current inventory control sheet accurately reflect on-hand stock? And the way you do this, or you verify this, is to go to the ration room. You want to count all of the unopened items should be accounted for on that sheet. So what I do is I will sort of spot check. I'll pick an item, maybe it's bulk mustard, for instance. So I would decide to look at bulk mustard. I would count the unopened items on the shelf, and then I would compare that to the inventory sheet. And I do that for a couple of items to see if things are being tracked. And then you should also see in each month's file, you should see an inventory sheet, and it should represent the inventory status at that point in time. Next is the AFMIS report. This is the report for after you have subsisted, you've served the meal, you submit the report. This is what we actually did. So the first question is, was the report completed and on file for each meal? That's simple. Is there a printout in each IDT month's file? The next question for AFMIS reports is, does the report reflect unit present for duty strength or enlisted SIK as reported on DA Form 1379? We actually did this in a previous section, so you should be able to answer this question because you did a count of your non-AGR, non-officers, enlisted SIK in a previous section. Section D, Catered Contract Meals. Now this section is very similar to the previous section. A lot of the same questions, although there are a few differences. Just like cooking meals, we still have to do an AFMS request. Are the requests complete and on file? Do they include rosters for consolidating units? Also, does the unit have requests from supported units on file? But there's an additional requirement here from Illinois, and that is this Illinois Form NGIL 715-1. It's the purchase request and commitment. And the question is the unit submitting 715-1 to battalion GPC holder and dislog FS, the food program manager, no later than 30 days prior to the meal? The NGIL 715-1 should also have a vendor quote or estimate accompanying in it when it goes to the battalion and the food program manager. There should be a copy of the vendor's seller's invoice with the receipt on file for each meal. And there's a question about whether the catered or commercial meal complies with the published menu standards. So the menu in force for the state, 21-day menu or whatever is approved by the menu board, you want that commercial or catered meal to comply with that. That's not always easy, but it can be done. And usually vendors will acquiesce to that requirement. The AFMS report, same as with a cooking meal, you still have to do an AFMS report. And does it reflect the unit's present for duty strength, enlisted SIK again, as reported on 1379? Then you have the 5914. Has the ration control sheet been properly prepared for each meal? And finally, something unique for catered and contract meals is the DA Form 3032, also known as the signature head count sheet. Are your SIK soldiers signing a 3032 when meals are consumed for catered meals? And this is a requirement for the Illinois Army National Guard. Section E, cash meal payment. Cash meal payment is an area where many units struggle. So we've dedicated quite a few questions to this particular part of the operation. The first few questions revolve around the DD 1544, also known as the cash meal payment sheet. First question, does the unit have a DD Form 1544 cash meal payment book/sheets on hand? And if so, list the serial number of the book. Well, that's the first question that really gets you going. Do you have cash meal payment for a unit? And if you answer yes to this question, then you have that. Next are the cash collection book, cash sheets, and cash collected for meals being properly safeguarded. So this is defined for us in Army regulations, but basically what we're asking here is the unit keeping their cash meal payment sheets and their cash collected under lock and key, like in a safe, for instance? Next is a question about DA Form 3546. This is the control record for the 1544 cash sheets. Basically, this is a document that is used by the cash book owner to issue a sheet and money to whoever is doing the cash collection activity for a meal. And there's an example of that I include in this presentation that we'll look at in a moment. Next question regarding the 1544, are cash meal payment sheets annotated with the correct meal rate, discount and standard, and the appropriate blocks of DD Form 1544 in accordance with DA PAM 3022? So basically here we're just wanting to make sure that we have actually written in what is the appropriate meal rate. And this is a good thing to do by the cash book, cash sheet owner, so that whoever is doing the actual cash sheet activity for the unit is charging the right price. If we leave it up to the head counter, you may or may not get the right price in here, and that can be a problem. Next question for 1544, did the head counter sign date and enter their rank after each meal served on the next unused line and head counter signature block in reference to DA form 1544? So this is just another question about, are they signing it properly, and then the other one is, are they closing it out properly? So these are just some questions that help us look at the operation. Are they handling those sheets properly? And there's an example in here as well. The next question is cash being turned in to the USPFO comptroller no later than 10 days after 1. Cash collections exceed $200, or all 50 sheets are used, or 3. Quarterly. The next few questions concern the turn-in of cash sheets and associated cash. First is in reference to the DD 1131, or cash collection voucher. So are all vouchers being filled out properly, and are copies on file for cash turned in? The next is the DA Form 200 transmittal record. This is a document you get from the comptroller when a unit turns in cash sheets and money. So the question is, does the unit have the receipt on file for cash being turned in? And this is really helps the auditor see, it's a paper trail, and it lets the auditor see that cash was turned in, that it was received by the comptroller. The last question regarding DA 200 is, are all turned in cash sheets that were returned back to the unit after USPFO accepted cash turned in, are they stapled to the appropriate DA 200 and maintained in a secure location with the cash book? So that's a really long question, but basically what it is getting at is, when you turn in your sheets and your cash to the comptroller, what they will do is give you back a DA 200, which is that receipt, but they'll also give you back your cash sheets. So those cash sheets you just turned in, they're going to give them back to you. And cash sheets, as we know, have to be maintained in a controlled way under lock and key. So when you get those back after turning in the cash, the best thing to do is to staple them to the receipt, to the 200, and put it in your safe. And then when it's time to turn in your cash book, turn those sheets in at the same time. The next question is regarding the cash collection book. Is it less than 3 years old from date of issue? If not, then it needs to be turned in. The next question regarding the cash collection book is it being revalidated each year by the unit or next higher headquarters, and was a copy of the revalidation on file? The way this works is, typically this happens during the unannounced cash count, and basically what the person will do is they'll account for every sheet in that book. So if they have the book, then they will look at the unused sheets, and then they'll also look at evidence for sheets that have been turned in. So they'll want to make sure that each sheet in that book is accounted for, and that's how you validate the cash book. The final two questions are regarding the unannounced cash count, which is activity that has to be conducted annually. So the first question is, was an unannounced cash count completed during the fiscal year and on file? And these have to be conducted by an individual from the next higher headquarters, an E5 or above, who is appointed in writing. The individual cannot be the food advisor or a member of his or her staff. The next question relating to that is really for battalions, brigades, and state, and that is an individual appointed in writing to perform unannounced cash counts for subordinate units? And again, the resource cannot be the food advisor or his staff. So it should be an E5 and appointed in writing. This is an example of the DA Form 3546, and as you may recall, this is the document that's used to issue the cash sheet and cash to the head counter. So cash sheet owner will actually initiate this transaction, and it just shows the cash sheets and the money being issued out, and then it shows where it gets issued back to the owner. This example is right out of DAPAM 3022. The only problem I have with it is that it's typed, and normally this document will never be typed. It's going to be handwritten. But it does show how it works, so it's a good example. This is an example of the D1544 cash sheet, and this example also came right out of DAPAM 3022. And you can see that they have the standard rate annotated on here. I don't see a discount rate, but that can be added. It also shows how to line out a meal and to actually line out an entire sheet when this sheet is ready to be closed. Section F, Training and Personnel. First question, are all food service personnel trained on all food service equipment? And then it puts each one in here, MBU, Generator 2K, LMTV, and Pintle Toe. The next two questions are about two different programs, training programs that units need to have for their food service personnel. And the first is about an ongoing training program. And this can actually take the form of something as simple as a printout of the 92 Golf job book for each soldier, where the food operations sergeant just marks and dates whenever a soldier completes that training. So that could be one piece of it. The other is just a collection of the training certificates. So if they have food safety and protection training, if they've got training on MBU or other fuel-fired equipment, these are things that could be maintained in that training program. The next piece is the Food Safety and Risk Management, or HACCP program. So this program can take a lot of different forms, but at a minimum, it should include the use of time and temperature logs. So that's the next question, is the unit using actively using DA Form 7458 and 7459 for every meal. So these are time temperature logs for cooking and for hot holding or serving, and those should be completed for every meal, and copies should be on file. The next question is regarding the DD 2973, which is the Food Operation Inspection Report. So this is really a document used to inspect your kitchen. So whether you are in a garrison environment or in a tactical environment like a CK, containerized kitchen, or an MKT, one of these forms will work for that. So the 73 is for garrison, the 74 is for a tactical kitchen. And these need to be completed by regulation quarterly, and typically should be done by a medical personnel, preventive med, but if you don't have those folks available, then a cook can do that, or the food operations sergeant. But they should be done quarterly, and this is an inspectable item. Next question, are both the person in charge and the person responsible for picking up rations sanitation qualified? And does the unit have copies of certificates on file? So sanitation qualified would take the form of the food safety and protection course that is put on by the adjunct instructors in the state. And this is typically a 2-day course that covers all sorts of topics in food safety. And we really want our supply person who's picking up the food to have this, because they're oftentimes responsible for receiving something from the vendor or picking up the food. And if they don't have this training, then they may potentially put troops at risk. Obviously, the food operations sergeant should have this because they're in charge of the overall kitchen and the food operation at a unit. The next question is regards to, has the company sized unit established and employed a manned, trained, and equipped a unit field sanitation team? So this is a kind of relatively recent requirement, but we want to make sure that units have this field sanitation team, and they're usually responsible for things like making sure the water is up to standard. They'll inspect the kitchens in the field, etc. This team should not be comprised of cooks, so unit commanders should be informed that cooks should not be part of this team because this team will actually inspect the operations of the cooks. The final question from this section is in regards to the status of the unit's food service personnel, the 92 Golfs. We want to know how many are authorized for this unit, how many of the slots are filled, how many are MOSQ, how many have the food safety and protection qualification. And this is good information for the unit and for hire to determine our strength needs. So this is simply an example of how units can set up a risk management or a HACCP program. And the bulletin board you see here has some risk management worksheets. It has blank 7458s and 9s, food service protection training slides, and this was a board that I saw in a unit that I reviewed that I thought was really good, and it was just kind of a working board that the unit used. Also in there you could have your kitchen inspection sheets, your DD 2973s and 4s, and then you can see the examples of the 7458 and 9 as well. Section G, meals ready to eat. So this is a really short section, and it's really just about MREs and other operational rations, such as UGRs. First question, are MREs on hand accounted for? So that's a pretty simple one, but the only way to verify that is with the second question and the third question. So the second one is the 5914. Is there a 5914 for MREs? And this is actually a document that is used differently for MREs and operational rations than it is used for A rations, in that the document is a rolling record of MREs. The 5914 should show every time MREs are drawn from the warehouse or turned back in. The final question is regarding supporting documentation. So every time MREs are drawn or turned in to the warehouse, you should receive a 2765 or potentially a 3161. So when that happens, that's a transaction that would get recorded on your 5914. But to support that 5914, you should also have this documentation. Without supporting documentation, an MRE 5914 is virtually meaningless. So this is an example of a 5914 rolling record for MREs. And you could substitute this for any operational ration. But you can show that meals are drawn and meals are issued and they're signed off at each point. So this is a really good example. This one is from DAPAM 3022. Section H, food service field equipment. So the first question is in regards to 5988E or DA Form 2404. And the question is, are DA 5988E or DA 2404 being maintained on all food service equipment? And were the records available for the review. So each piece of field equipment should have one of these records on it, and when the reviewer comes to review or do the inspection, those should all be available for every piece of equipment. The DA 5986E, also known as the Preventative Maintenance Schedule Record, this document is used when a piece of equipment is being serviced. So the unit will probably not have this equipment on site, but they should have a 5986 if it's out for servicing. The remaining questions are just for any remaining field equipment, and really we're just asking and we're validating if these pieces of equipment are clean and if they've been stored properly. Section I, Food Service Garrison Equipment. This is our final section of the checklist. The first question around the garrison equipment is regarding DA Form 3988, or the Equipment Replacement Record. And the question is a 3988 on file listing all garrison food service equipment? And this is a record of equipment details and the estimated replacement time. And so one form will actually contain all of your food service equipment, such as your refrigerators, freezers, stoves, etc. There's also a version of this form in AFMAS that can be used as well. The next question is regarding the NGIL 715-1, and this is the purchase request and commitment, which we've talked about before. And the question is, does the unit have a copy of all 715-1s on file for any garrison equipment being requested from the dislog FS, or the food program manager? So this is a case of if you're ordering equipment at less than $3,000, you can order it through the GPC card, but you have to go through this process of using the 715-1. And this is again an Illinois Army National Guard requirement. The remaining questions, similar to the field questions, are about equipment, and really you're just wanting to make sure the state of those equipment is clean and serviceable. One thing I will touch on are refrigerators and freezers. You should have a working equipment thermometer on those, so that's a thermometer built into the equipment. But you should also have inside those pieces of equipment, you should have a freestanding or a hanging thermometer that should be positioned near the door. So we want to have 2 thermometers on all of our refrigerators and freezers. While we're on the topic of thermometers, as you are looking at refrigerators and freezers, if you notice that the temperature on the thermometer is within the temperature danger zone, which is any temperature between 41 and 135 degrees Fahrenheit, then you need to deadline that equipment. And I've come across this many times where the equipment thermometer is not working and it's showing hot. Well, until that's validated and serviced, that piece of equipment should not be used by anybody. This concludes the training module on executing the dining facility account review. Thanks for listening, and I hope you found this training useful. If you have any feedback for me, please send an email to ileaglerising@gmail.com. Thanks.